Hello, this is Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell, and I want to welcome you to Contemporary Black Voices. Today on the seat with me, I have Chris Dawkins, who is an activist here in San Antonio, the writer Fred Williams, and to my right, Caleb Alexander, who is a New York Times bestseller. Today's topic deals with the plight and future of Black farmers. What we have to remember is that the contributions of Blacks in farming didn't just stop in the 21st century. The, the contributions started really when they came off those slave ships and were put on the plantations. So I have today our guest, Dr. Alvenia Woodard Davis, who is a former mentor of mine, and she did her dissertation study on this very topic. And before we get started, we ask that you hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you. So, Dr. Davis, I want you to get used to hearing that.
I know, I
Dr.
love it.
Davis, what were the factors that led to you wanting to study this topic?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for the opportunity to, just allowing me the opportunity to share my study, Reviving the Roots, a study of Black women in agriculture and the impact of post-secondary education. So I was led to this particular topic. I grew up in a small rural town in Freestone County, Texas, and I was the youngest of seven children. I had five sisters. I had five sisters, and then one brother. It was six girls and one boy, and my brother was kind of like in close to the middle. He was the third from the oldest. But in any case, the expectation was that my brother would carry on the family legacy of farming and ranching, after my father's passing and so forth. But unfortunately, in 2014, he preceded my father. He passed away, and at that time, I think I was the next in line to kind of take on that role, because whereas my other sisters, they when they were busy learning to cook and sew and things like that, I was the one who was kind of like their little scrappy ranch hand in the way, riding in the back of the truck, helping out in the dirt, things like that. So needless to say, when that role was shifted to me after my brother's passing, and then my dad actually passed in 2017. And because of that, I started seeking out resources, other Black women who were also in agriculture, someone who I could align with. And I could not, I mean, there were very few at the time. So that's when I wanted to, I decided to ask the question, well, why? Why are there not more Black women in the field of agriculture? So at this point, even though my major is higher education administration, my PhD is in higher education administration. This is a way for me to parlay two passions, both in education and in agriculture.
Okay. So, given the opening statement topic, what are your perspectives regarding the plight of Black farmers in the United States? And then we can talk about the women.
Okay. I think part of it, so the USDA, they reported that there's 3.4 million total farmers. And of that 3.4 million, 36% are women and only 1.3%, almost 1.4% are Black. And included in that 1.4%, there's a very, very small percentage of women that's included there. So as you can see, there, the voice for Black women in agriculture, it has not been heard, not even a small whisper, because it's, there's not a lot. So the purpose of my study was mainly to find out the perception, find out the lived experiences of Black women in agriculture, and again, the impact of post-secondary education. So moving forward, I interviewed 10 experienced producers, age range of between 30 and 65, and I also conducted a focus group at an HBCU that has an A&M credentials. So I interviewed 10 students who were agriculture majors, just to get their perspectives as well. So I wanted to, like, just kind of gauge gauge the information from an experience level to the next generation aspiring farmers. So when I say that, when considering the plight of Black farmers in the United States, progressively, I think it's getting better. However, there's still a lot of room to grow. Um, on one hand, I have the experienced producers who were motivated by legacy, the cultural relevance, just the appreciation for healthy food options because, they didn't grow up in an environment with fast food, um, all around. They know what to do, but it's based mainly on what they saw, what they've experienced from their fathers or their parents and their grandparents, things of that sort. Whereas the younger generation, what I found was that they are also concerned with sustainable food sources, but they're looking at it more from a business opportunity. Two of the people that I interviewed, one had actually left her career on Wall Street to go back to Texas to work on her father's ranch to be the ranch manager there. Have another young lady who left the field of engineering in order to focus on agriculture because she felt that she could apply some of her training and some of the things that she's learned into engineering into a profitable business with agriculture. So they're learning. You have the older people who are the more experienced farmers who know what to do because of their teaching and their hands-on experience. And then you have the younger generation with all of its technology, the innovations. They're learning how to just kind of build upon on our historical experiences with agriculture, making it better and also making it more efficient for us. So although, there is an ambitious agenda for both, for women in agriculture, it's important to recognize that the more things change, the more they do stay the same because some of the same tactics, as I'll go into maybe a little later, some of the same tactics that were they're applied in prior years, geared to hold us back. They're still being utilized, but I think now or in a more sophisticated manner.
I'm glad you mentioned these women who are leaving high-paying fields to go back into to go and work in sustainable farming. Uh, my family, my mother's side of the family, are from the Gullah Islands, and there's a show on I think Netflix called High on the Hog, and one of the episodes dealt with this young woman who left New York to go back into South Carolina to try to, again, continue what she's learned from her father, but trying to protect the land because the government was trying to take over this land due to eminent domain. And usually the lands that these farmers got were kind of like just dirt and rock. But they nurtured the land to grow excellent crops. And just recently in South Carolina, some more farmers are losing their land because of eminent domain, where they want to run a highway through this land. So in terms of preparedness, what can you tell us how we and those who want to go into sustainable farming, what do we need to know to prepare ourselves for these situations?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think first of all, just understanding the motivation for why we want to keep the land, why we want to hang on to it. And it's so interesting because with my study, I utilized two theories, one being Maslow's hierarchy of theory to address that motivation, what motivates Black women into agriculture, but then also intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw's theory regarding, which helped to highlight the barriers associated with Black women in this space that's, has predominantly been dominated by older white males. So when you think of, I will speak a lot about air property. And I think for me, just having the passion to know how that most of the time when you think of heir property, that someone had to unfortunately had passed on in order for you to acquire. So I think the passion in having that appreciation for how hard they work, not only to obtain the legacy that's been left behind, but also and to secure the generational wealth, but also to sustain it at a time when it was not easy for Black people to own land. So within my study, I looked at four different categories in order to as we move forward. One being the historical foundation, which provided the connection between Blacks in agriculture and the tainted legacy of slavery and sharecropping, and then also the current trends, as we discussed a little bit earlier, the need for higher education and the importance of having like an inclusive curriculum to include women, and also representation. That's very key in higher education, especially at the HBCUs and 1890 institutions. And then finally, the sustainable agriculture. I think one of the things that COVID showed us was that it's so important that we're able to have, have a really good food source. So I think that and the environmental protection that's required as part of the motivation is some of the things that helps to sustain it. So to answer, I think I'm kind of jumping all around, but to answer your question, again, just training, preparing, having a good succession plan in place, as well as, being able to pivot, because with agriculture, things are very fluid. So it's very important to be able to have like a plan B in place in order to move forward.
You mentioned the heir property, and again, I'm thinking back to South Carolina, where there hasn't been paperwork filed associated with land that Blacks had cultivated back in the day for many, many years. And it's a shame that now these families are fighting hard to keep the land, and in some cases losing out because of eminent domain. I know you participated in discussions as well as talked with the USDA and other agricultural experts on the challenges Black farmers face in getting the financing needed to protect the land, livestock, and other farming provisions. So please share with us what is needed to help these farmers and how the Black community can support them.
Okay. Well, that's a really good question. So some of the implications that I found in the study definitely did relate to USDA. So when you think about the Justice for Black Farmers Act, it was enacted in order to reform the USDA from past discrimination, to end the discriminations within that agency, as a result of the Pickford-Glickman lawsuit. But as I mentioned, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because again, Black farmers are still being denied access to credit. Black farmers, they are still, USDA, they're still intentionally delaying the release of funds. So you hear on the news where a lot of the farmers, they're going under because they can't, they don't have the resources, they don't have the funds to support, their farm business. And then again, you have loan applications being denied. You have inflexible loan terms for the few who, maybe are awarded a loan, but you have those inflexible loan terms, as well as other efforts to disrupt the distribution of funding for Black farmers. So when determining priorities and allocation of the 2018 Farm Bill, it's good to know, as I mentioned, the strategies have changed. The concept, the strategy to keep us down, but their process of doing it has changed a little bit, because even with the 2018 Farm Bill, the allocation was based on production. So then, so when you think about it, very few Black farmers had like large farm operations, but that was geared towards then President Trump. That was his way of supporting his base, based on the production of, the size and the production of the farms. And again, a lot of the smaller mom and pop farms, little family-owned farms, were kind of left out of that equation. So even with the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, it is intended to improve those allocations, but the criteria has changed. And even just the terminology that they're using, to where it's not so much focused on race, but still trying to meet that need without coming out saying that we're meeting the needs of the socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So I guess the second part of your question, how can we help? I think for me, the most crucial part is voting. Definitely voting, because it's important that we elect people not only locally, but from a local, state, and federal level, who can help to advocate on behalf of Black farmers. Also, from a practical perspective, it's definitely necessary to change I guess, just the outdated image of what a farmer looks like. Again, as I mentioned, when I started, I didn't see a lot of Black farmers who looked like me, because again, I had the image of an older white male in overalls, cowboy hat. That's what I was used to seeing. But I think the more we're out front and basically sharing our opinions and sharing our experience, I think that helps to encourage younger people to get involved in farming. And then another thing is also removing the negative connotation associated with agriculture. I can't tell you how many times I heard the people who I interviewed talking about not having support, especially like the younger generation, because their parents can understand, oh, we're paying all this money for you to go to college, but you're there playing in the dirt, or working with cattle, working with animals, things like that, not really seeing the bigger picture and the vision that these students have for something that's so important, not only to them, but to society as a whole. So I think that's also important. And then just being passionate about eliminating the food disparities, the discrepancies in our food supply. I think that's another key factor that will help as far as when we start looking at provisioning of farming.
You were talking eliminating negative imaging of farming in the community. Now, I'm not a farmer, but I have a backyard full of fruit trees, vegetables, and stuff. And the reason why I got involved was really because what I was seeing with the COVID lockdown and access to the grocery stores. And I said I needed to start growing my own stuff. Now, one more question.
Mhm.
Queen sugar. Uh, you and I have talked about it multiple times, but for those who don't know, Queen Sugar is a show that talks about a family down in Louisiana or Mississippi and the struggles they have undergone to keep the land. So, are you seeing a parallel? Was a show a fantasy or a reality?
The show is definitely a reality. And I share this because I started writing, based on my journaling. I started writing and compiling a book, and I've gone through a couple of editors in my writing. When I first saw Queen Sugar, I was like, my editors, somebody had to have leaked some of my content, because it's so much, there were so many parallels in the story with Queen Sugar and with my story. But what I found, there's a lot of Queen Sugar stories out there. There's a whole bunch, and it's not, it's not just centered in one, particular area. When you look at the Black Belt states, you have a story. I bet you can name a couple of stories in pretty much every single state, because it's prevalent. That attitude of having, this wealthy, ruthless businessman who, pretty much just do whatever he wants. Because he knows that he has the money to support it. You have the corrupt officials who also kind of engage in helping with that. And I share I say all the time, it's almost like we're living in Jim Crow all over again.
Mhm.
And I know for me personally, I have an added appreciation because it's almost like I can feel the I can feel what my ancestors went through, just the discouragement and the disappointment and the feeling of helplessness when you know that this is something that you legally own, but to have people gradually take it's really frustrating. And I will say one of my cousins, I'm going to plug her book, but Colored River, she wrote this book about my maternal side of the family, and she has like court cases and legal documents showing how 1,700 acres of oil rich soil land was stolen from our family with the help of corrupt county officials in that county. Now, this was in the early 1900s when this happened, when this book happened. And it wasn't even so much just the land. Granted, the land was valuable, but the minerals, the billions of dollars of minerals that was generated from this land, and the fact that it was denied, it was denied to my family. So when you have the laws that are contributing to Black land laws, specifically in rural communities, it's very disheartening. So I say, again, this book was in the early 1900s. Well, the content was based in the early 1900s, well, late 1800s, early 1900s when this happened. But what I'm dealing with now, after my dad died in 2017, it's like the floodgates just opened for these people to do whatever they wanted to do. So it's like where our land sits, it's in an island between what used to be Dow Chemical land, and it's a wealthy business owner from Houston who's there. He's put in a dam that's eroding away. The water's eroding away our property. I'm consistently having to pay to get our drive repaired because of the water erosion. Navasota Valley Electric, which is the power co-op, they've actually installed transformers illegally, no easement whatsoever. They've installed these transformers that's crisscrossing the family home to the point where it's not even safe to occupy the home because of the way the wiring is. It's only going to take one good bolt of lightning, and it's probably the house will probably go up in flames. So you have that. You have another area where it was used to be an old wagon trail that my grandfather used to allow the Black families in the community to use in order to get to the cemetery. Because once the man-made lake that parallels, that's adjacent to his property, what used to be his property, they restricted Black people from trespassing on lake property. So my grandfather would allow them to use that old wagon trail to get to the cemetery. Well, needless to say, now they've since moved because with all of the passing, and another church was built maybe 2 miles down the road. So they stopped burying people there, but yet the graves of enslaved people are still there and neglected because we have these Plight landowners who basically put their little sheds, their dog runs, all of this other kind of stuff, basically just disregarding the historically Black cemeteries. So you have that. So with those easements that I'm fighting. So and again, I say because they have the thousands of dollars, and that's the strategy because they know that they have the funds to tie us up in court. Surveys are called, being able to provide surveys, get surveys to justify and to support what you already own legally. It's disheartening. I even had one realtor that I kind of got into a discussion, a white realtor that I got into the discussion with a few months ago, because she even implied that the reason Black people are losing their land in the rural area, in that rural community, is because they're deeding their land to the NAACP. And the NAACP is taking these people's land and not paying the taxes, and the land is getting foreclosed on.
Oh wow. Okay, I know we're going to be discussing this with the guys.
Oh my gosh, I was so mad. But I even reached out to the national headquarters of the NAACP because, and you could tell this older man that she was representing, and the reason I even had that conversation with her is because she was selling land that this older gentleman who's battling cancer, he's trying to get rid of his property before he passed. And I get that, I sympathize with him, but he doesn't have clear title to the land. And she was pushing the sale. She's altered documents in order to push the sale. And to have the stress that's added to this old gentleman. And what another thing that really angered me, instead of her even referring to him as Mr. Solomon, she calls him Solomon. Well, Solomon this, Solomon that. And I was like, you know what, just the lack of respect.
There's so many stories out there.
It's so many stories. I told you I would go on for days and days.
Yeah. So
But the,
we really want to thank you for coming on to the show. And if I find a way to get you back on, you know I'm going to text you. So
okay.
again, we want to thank you, Dr. Alvenia Woodard Davis.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Have a wonderful day.